Florida just earned a title no homeowner wants their state to hold. According to new data released by ATTOM Data Solutions, Florida now has the worst foreclosure rate of any state in the entire country. Not the second worst, not in the top 5. The worst? While national headlines focus on interest rates and home prices, this number has been climbing quietly in the background, and it tells a very different story about what is actually happening to homeowners on the ground. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how bad Florida's foreclosure numbers really are compared to the rest of the country, which Florida cities are driving that number higher than anywhere else in America, and what this trend is signaling about the months ahead for anyone who owns property in this state. My name is David Cole. I am the Editor-in-Chief of Housing Intel. If this is your first time here, I want to invite you to do something simple. Become a member of this channel. Membership funds the data subscriptions and the research time that go into every report we publish, and it keeps this channel independent from the real estate industry, which has no interest in showing you numbers like the ones we are about to cover. You will find the membership button below this video. If you believe in data over hype, join us. Now let us get into what ATTOM's numbers actually show. The first number comes straight from ATTOM's May 2026 United States Foreclosure Market Report, released in mid-June. Nationwide, 40,355 properties had a foreclosure filing in May. That includes default notices, scheduled auctions, and bank repossessions combined. On its own, that number is down 5% from April. That sounds like good news until you look at the year-over-year comparison. Compared to May of 2025, foreclosure filings nationwide are up 14%. So while the month-to-month trend looks calm, the broader trajectory is moving in one direction, and that direction is up. ATTOM's Chief Executive Officer, Rob Barber, addressed this directly in the report. He said that while foreclosure activity eased from April levels, the broader trend remains one of gradual year-over-year growth, and that elevated mortgage rates, rising ownership costs, and affordability constraints continue to put pressure on homeowners across the country. Now, here is where Florida enters the picture, and this is the number that matters most for anyone watching this from the Sunshine State. Nationally, 1 in every 3,562 housing units had a foreclosure filing in May. Florida's rate was 1 in every 2,110 housing units. Let that sink in for a moment. Florida homeowners are facing foreclosure at a rate substantially worse than the national average, and no other state in the country posted a worse number. South Carolina came in second at 1 in every 2,287 housing units. Maryland, Nevada, and Indiana rounded out the rest of the top 5. But Florida sits alone at the very top of a list no state wants to lead. This is not a new development that appeared overnight. According to ATTOM's first quarter 2026 report, Florida already had one of the worst foreclosure rates in the nation back in March, with 1 in every 2,124 housing units affected. Florida also posted the second highest number of foreclosure starts of any state in the first quarter, with just over 10,000 properties entering the foreclosure process, trailing only Texas. This tells you Florida's foreclosure problem has been building steadily for months, not appearing suddenly in a single data release. The trend line has been pointed in this direction since at least the start of the year. Let us zoom into the city level because the state average hides just how severe this is in specific Florida markets. Among major metro areas with populations over 2 million, Tampa posted one of the worst foreclosure rates in the entire country, with 1 in every 1,878 housing units carrying a filing. Orlando was not far behind, with 1 in every 2,034 housing units. Both cities ranked among the 5 worst large metro areas in America for foreclosure activity in May, alongside Cleveland, Baltimore, and Riverside, California. Notice something about that list. Most of the metro areas competing with Tampa and Orlando for the worst foreclosure rates are older Midwest and Rust Belt cities with long histories of economic distress. Florida cities are not supposed to be on that list. For years, Florida's growth story was built around population gains and rising demand. Seeing Tampa and Orlando trade places with cities like Cleveland and Baltimore on a foreclosure ranking is a signal that something in the underlying economics of Florida homeownership has shifted. And earlier in the year, smaller Florida markets like Lakeland and Punta Gorda posted some of the highest foreclosure rates of any metro area in the entire country, regardless of size. In the first quarter, Lakeland recorded one foreclosure filing for roughly every 409 housing units, and Punta Gorda was close behind at one in every 416. To put that in perspective, those rates are more than 5 times worse than the national average for that same period. These are not isolated statistical blips in tiny markets nobody tracks. Lakeland and Punta Gorda are real, growing communities that have absorbed thousands of new residents over the past several years, which makes their foreclosure numbers even more notable. Growth and distress are happening in the same places at the same time. Before we move further into what is driving this, I want to pause here. If the kind of independent data-first analysis you are watching right now is valuable to you, the most direct way to support it is through a super thanks. You will see that option directly below this video. It goes toward keeping this channel funded by viewers instead of real estate sponsors who would rather you never see numbers like Tampa's foreclosure rate. Even a small contribution tells us this reporting matters. Now, back to the data, because the next part explains exactly why Florida is leading the nation in this category. So what is actually driving Florida's foreclosure numbers higher than every other state? ATTOM's research points to several layered factors working together rather than a single cause. The first is elevated mortgage rates that have remained high enough, long enough, to strain homeowners who refinanced or purchased during the higher rate environment of recent years. Anyone who bought a home or pulled equity out of one while rates were elevated is now carrying a monthly payment that leaves far less room for unexpected expenses than it would have just a few years earlier. The second is rising ownership costs, and for Florida specifically, that phrase carries extra weight. Florida homeowners are dealing with property insurance premiums that, according to industry data we covered in a previous report, can run nearly 5 times the national average in some parts of the state. When insurance costs climb that fast, on top of a mortgage payment that has not changed, monthly obligations stop fitting inside household budgets that were never built to absorb that kind of increase. There is also a structural piece to this story that is specific to Florida's recent history. The state saw a dramatic surge in home prices during the pandemic years, and many of those gains are now reversing in parts of the state. Industry analysts have pointed out that this creates a difficult trap for some homeowners. If a home's value has declined from its pandemic-era peak, an owner who is now struggling to make payments may not be able to sell the property for enough to fully satisfy what they owe on it. That dynamic can turn a temporary cash flow problem into a forced foreclosure because selling is no longer a clean way out. It is a trap that does not show up in a simple mortgage rate chart because the homeowner did nothing wrong. They bought or refinanced when prices were near their peak, and the market simply moved against them afterward. Foreclosure starts, which function as an early warning indicator for future completed foreclosures, climbed 13% year-over-year nationally in May, reaching 27,304 properties. Florida has consistently ranked among the top 2 or 3 states for foreclosure starts throughout 2026. In the first quarter of the year alone, Florida posted just over 10,000 foreclosure starts, trailing only Texas nationally. That is a meaningful detail because Texas has a larger population and a larger overall housing stock than Florida. For Florida to be running neck and neck with Texas on raw foreclosure starts while having a smaller number of total housing units is part of why its foreclosure rate, which adjusts for the size of the housing market, comes out worse than almost anywhere else in the country. Completed foreclosures, known in the industry as REOs, or real estate-owned properties, are the final stage of this process, when a lender actually takes back the home. Nationally, REOs rose 6% year-over-year in May, with 4,092 properties moving through to completion. Florida posted 340 of those REOs in May alone, placing it among the states with the highest completed foreclosure counts in the country, behind only Texas, California, and Illinois. When you put the starts and the completions together, the picture is consistent at every stage of the foreclosure pipeline. Florida is not just seeing more homeowners fall behind. It is seeing more of those cases run all the way through to a bank actually repossessing the property. It is worth being precise about what these numbers do and do not mean. ATTOM's own reporting is careful to note that despite these year-over-year increases, foreclosure volumes nationwide remain well below historical norms and far below the levels seen during the 2008 financial crisis. This is not a return to that era, at least not yet. But the direction of the trend matters just as much as the current level. A market that is gradually climbing from a low base looks very different 12 months from now than a market that has stabilized, and right now, Florida's data is firmly in the climbing category, not the stabilizing one. There is also a timing detail worth understanding. ATTOM's research shows the average time a property spends in the foreclosure process has actually been shrinking, down to roughly 577 days, as courts and servicers continue working through cases built up during the pandemic era, pause on foreclosures. Faster processing means properties that begin the foreclosure process now are reaching completion sooner than they would have a few years ago. For Florida, where the starts have been elevated for months, that means the completed foreclosure numbers we are seeing today may only be the early stage of a pipeline that is still working its way through the system. So what is the verdict here? Florida holds the worst foreclosure rate in the entire United States as of May 2026, and that is not a one-month anomaly. It is the continuation of a trend that has been building since the start of the year, driven by a combination of elevated borrowing costs, insurance expenses that are reshaping what homeownership actually costs in this state, and a price correction in some markets that is leaving certain homeowners with less equity cushion than they expected. If you own property in Florida, particularly in markets like Tampa, Orlando, Lakeland, or Punta Gorda, this data is worth tracking closely over the next several reporting cycles because foreclosure starts today tend to show up as completed foreclosures and shifting inventory months down the road. If you are considering buying in Florida right now, this is exactly the kind of data that belongs in your decision, not just the asking price on a listing. And if you already follow this channel, you know this fits a pattern we have been documenting for months across multiple Florida markets. This is exactly why Housing Intel exists. The real estate industry is not going to lead with a headline that says, "Florida has the worst foreclosure rate in the country." We will because the data says it is true, and homeowners deserve to see it before it becomes a crisis instead of a warning. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening in Florida's housing market, subscribe to Housing Intel so you never miss a report. We publish data-driven real estate analysis every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We will see you in the next one.